This is my read aloud for pre-K, and I'm going to read the big orange spot. So I'd first start by looking at the cover and I'd say, look at this cover, what do you see? I see a big orange spot, a man, and a house. So I wonder what the story is going to be about. Mr. Plumbean lived on a street where all the houses were the same. He liked it that way. So did everybody else on Mr. Plumbean's street. This is a neat street, they would say. And I would pause and I'd say, it says that it's a neat street. I wonder what it means to be a neat street. Look at this picture of all the houses. And I remember that on this page, it says that he lived on a street where all the houses were the same. But on this page, it says it's a neat street. And I'm looking at the picture of all of the houses that are the same. So I think a neat street are where all of the houses are the same. Then one day, a seagull flew over Mr. Plumbean's house. He was carrying a bright orange paint can. No one knows why. He dropped the can, no one knows why, right over Mr. Plumbean's house. So who do you think the story is going to be about? So far, I've only seen Mr. Plumbean and some neighbors, but they don't really have a name, and a seagull. But the seagull dropped it on Mr. Plumbean's house. I think the story is going to be about Mr. Plumbean. It made a big orange spot on Mr. Plumbean's house. Oh, too bad, everybody said. Mr. Plumbean will have to paint his house again. I suppose I will, said Mr. Plumbean, but he didn't paint his house right away. He looked at the big orange spot for a long time, and then he went about his business. So how did that orange spot end up on the house? Well, the seagull dropped it, but no one knows why. What do you think the neighbors think about the orange spot? Do you think they like it? Yes or no? Why do you think that? Well, they say, oh, too bad. He'll have to paint his house again. So I don't think that they like the spot. The neighbors got tired of seeing that big orange spot. Someone said, Mr. Plumbean, we wish you would get around to painting your house. Okay, said Mr. Plumbean. He got some blue paint and some white paint, and that night he got busy. He painted at night because it was cooler. When the paint was gone, the roof was blue, the walls were white, and the big orange spot was still there. He got some more paint. He got red paint, yellow paint, green paint, and purple paint. So why do you think Mr. Plumbean did not cover up the orange spot on his house? Well, I think that maybe it's because he liked it. In the morning, the other people on the street came out of their houses. Their houses were all the same, but Mr. Plumbean's house was like a rainbow. It was like a jungle. It was like an explosion. Oh my goodness, what did he do to his house? Look at the picture. Here's Mr. Plumbean's house, and here's everyone else's house. So I asked, what did he do to his house? And they would tell me he painted it, or it's different colors. There was the big orange spot, and there were little orange spots. There were stripes. There were pictures of elephants and lions and pretty girls and steam shovels. The people said, Mr. Plumbean has popped his cork, flipped his wig, and blown his stack, and dropped his stopper. They went away muttering. And I'd pause and I'd say, he popped his cork. That's interesting. What do you think that means when someone says he popped his cork? To me it sounds like maybe he went a little nuts or a little silly. That day, Mr. Plumbean bought carpenter's tools. That night, he built a tower on top of his roof, and he painted on the clock tower. If to pop your cork means that you went a little crazy or silly, what do they think about Mr. Plumbean? They think that he went a little silly or a little crazy. The next day, the people said, Plumbean has gushed his mush, lost his marbles, and slipped his hawser. They decided they would pretend not to notice. Look at his house now. Look at all of that. So I would try and show them the house and get them to see how it's different from the other two houses and get them to kind of describe the house and what kind of words could we use to describe Mr. Plumbean's house. It's colorful. I see it's got pictures of animals on it. It's got a clock tower. The other houses do not have a clock tower. That very night, Mr. Plumbean got a truck full of green things. He planted palm trees, babobas, thorn bushes, onions, and frangipani. In the morning, he bought a hammock and an alligator. When the other people came out of their houses, they saw Mr. Plumbean swinging in a hammock between two palm trees. They saw an alligator lying in the grass. Mr. Plumbean was drinking lemonade. So now what kind of words would you use to describe Mr. Plumbean's house? Look at his house now. It changed again. And hopefully they would notice that it's got more trees. It's got an alligator now. It's a lot different. Mr. Plumbean has gone too far. This used to be a neat street. Plumbean, what have you done to your house? The people shouted. My house is me and I am it. My house is where I like to be and it looks like all of my dreams, Mr. Plumbean said. And I would stop and I'd say, that's interesting. He said, my house is me and I am it. What do you think he means when he says his house is him? And then I might turn back to this page and let them look at the house and I would say, well, it said that he liked lions and elephants and he even got an alligator and some trees, so maybe his house is him because it's got all of the things on it that he likes. Why do you think his house was not him before? And maybe they would say, well, because the other houses were plain and they all looked the same and it didn't look like the things that he liked. The people went away. They asked the man who lived next door to Mr. Plumbean to go and have a talk with him. Tell him that we all liked his house before he changed it. Tell him his house has to be the same as ours so we can have a neat street. So do you think the man is going to talk to him? What do you think the man is going to say to Mr. Plumbean to get him to change his mind and change his house back? They might say, they might say that he would tell him to just change it back because the neighbors like it and it has to be like everyone else. And then I would ask him, if you were the neighbor and you had to go talk to Mr. Plumbean about changing his house, would you ask him to change his house back or would you tell him to leave it like it is? Why or why not? And I would just be interested to listen to their answers. The man went to see Mr. Plumbean that evening, and they sat under the palm trees drinking lemonade and talking all night long. What do you think that they were talking about? Maybe they were talking about his house? I don't know. Early the next morning, the man went out to get lumber and rope and nails and paint. When the people came out of their houses, they saw a red and yellow ship next door to the house of Mr. Plumbean. So the neighbor did what to his house? He changed it. What do you think the neighbor and Mr. Plumbean talked about to get the neighbor to change his house? What have you done to your house? They shouted at the man. My house is me and I am it. My house is where I like to be and it looks like all my dreams, said the man who always loved ships. He's just like Plumbean, the people said. He's got bees in his bonnet, bats in his belfry, and knots in his noodle. Then one by one they went to see Mr. Plumbean late at night. They would sit under the palm trees and drink lemonade and talk about their dreams, and whenever anyone visited Mr. Plumbean's house the very next day, that person would set about changing his own house to fit his dreams. So that's very interesting. Why would they change their house after they talked to Mr. Plumbean? I thought they all wanted a neat street. And then I would listen to their answers and I'd kind of say, maybe it's because they all want their houses to be like them or their dreams. Oh my goodness, look at this picture. And I'd show them the pictures. We'd talk about, what does this look like? Well, to me, this looks like an air balloon. What does this look like? Have you seen another building that looks like this before? Tell me about the building. There's more different pictures of the different houses. And then I'd ask them, well, based on these houses and how they look, what do you think that these people's dreams are? So I go back to this and I'd say, well, we said this looks like a hot air balloon. What do you do in a hot air balloon? Well, it lifts you up and you can kind of fly. So maybe this person likes to fly or maybe they like to travel. And then I'd start gradually releasing them and asking different things about the other ones. What words can you use to describe these pictures? And how would you compare this new street to the old neat street? And I would show them a picture of the old neat street. And I'd say, well, all these houses look the same, and all of these houses look different. And then ask them to describe more, go into more detail. Well, how are they the same and how are they different? Whenever a stranger came to the street of Mr. Plumbean and his neighbors, the stranger would say, "This is not a neat street." Then all the people would say, "Our street is us and we are it. Our street is where we like to be and it looks like all of our dreams." So why do you think it was important for Mr. Plumbean to have a house that looked like him and his dreams? What do you think of the new street? Do you like it, or do you like the neat street better? Why? I'd like to hear their answers as to why. Would you live on a neat street or a different street? And then after reading the story, I would ask, after we read the story, do you think that people are still upset that they don't live on a neat street? Why or why not? And then how do you think that the story would have changed if Mr. Plumbean would have listened to the complaints of his neighbors and changed his house? What do you think would happen to the story? And then after I read it, we might go to center time, and so I might ask them to do a project and say, after reading the story, if you had to make a house that looked like your dreams, what would it look like? And then I'd have them, they can draw it, color it, paint it, or they could build it out of building blocks in the science center. I would really leave it up to them. And then I would also ask them, after you built your house, what could you do to stop another bird from dropping a can of paint on your house? And that is it. Thank you.